Welcome to What's Next ATL, powered by the Atlanta Regional Commission, where we explore the big new ideas shaping Metro Atlanta. I'm Kate Sweeney. This episode, we start out hearing from you.
Hi, Kate. So just this morning, I found out that my rent is going up because of the increase in property taxes.
A number of you got in touch with us after we posted on Facebook asking you for your stories about challenges with housing affordability. This story comes from a listener named Ruth.
So in spite of being a tenured professor at a major state university, it won't be long before I'm priced out of where I live.
We also heard from Deidre, who was trying to buy a house.
So I've been looking for about 10 weeks total, and the houses are either not affordable or they're in bad neighborhoods with no services, so still looking.
Then there was Netta.
Many people have the misconception that all of us landlords take advantage, but few consider the fact that we too are affected financially and often have little choice. This will be the last year I'll be able to keep my rents low, and I'm pretty bummed out about it.
Whether we're renters or homeowners, increasing problems with housing affordability is a serious issue for a lot of us, certainly around the entire country, but increasingly right here at home in the ATL. In this episode, we wanted to learn more and talk solutions. And it turned out there was so much to share that we've wound up dedicating 2 episodes to housing affordability this first season. Today, we'll hear from 2 elected officials from very different parts of town who've made this their central issue.
How do we get working class families and middle class families back up on an upwardly mobile economic track? And housing has to be the way you do it.
New folks come in and they have the money to pay $1,800 for a rent, whereas the people that have been here for a while are like, why is this city so expensive now?
But first things first, let's get our terms straight with a few key facts from our numbers guy, Mike Carnathan. He manages ARC's research and analytics group. Mike, is it okay if I call you our numbers guy? I didn't even ask you if I could do that.
That's fine. It's totally fine.
You don't sound enthused.
I get called so many things. It's data geek and just geek or dork, or it's fine.
You can own it.
I have no choice but to own it.
So we hear the term affordable housing kind of, I'll say, bandied about a lot. And your first number is going to lay out for us exactly what we mean by this term.
The first key number is 30. Housing is considered affordable if a family spends less than 30% of its income on housing costs, whether that's rent, it's mortgage, utility, things like that.
That leaves money for things like food, car repairs, medical bills, I guess.
Childcare.
That's a big one for me. So what's our next number?
So our next number is going to be 50,000. And so if you look at most of our neighborhoods in Metro Atlanta, they're simply not affordable to households making less than $50,000 a year. And so to put that into a little bit of context, more than half the region's workers make less than that.
I'm already sensing a challenge here in Metro Atlanta. More than half of us cannot afford to live most places in the region, it sounds like. Is that accurate to say?
Absolutely.
Okay. And then this is Metro Atlanta, so transportation becomes a complicating factor, right?
That's right. We actually grade out to be sort of an affordable place if you look at just housing in Metro Atlanta. If you take housing and transportation costs, combine them, a moderate income family would pay 63% of their total income on those housing and transportation costs combined. So that only leaves 37% for things like food.
So there are some of the numbers. Many of us are paying more than we can afford on our rent and mortgages in Metro Atlanta. And one big reason for that? Transportation. For example, we may not live near where we work, so the problem is compounded. And now for a little more context on how we've reached this point, I spoke with Sarah Kirsch. She's the executive director of Atlanta's chapter of the Urban Land Institute, a nonprofit dedicated to advancing responsible land use.
That's a great description. ULI is a global nonprofit. It's a big tent organization with everyone who touches how cities get built.
It seems like more and more we're seeing and hearing stories about a lack of affordable housing around the country, and that's increasingly the case here in Metro Atlanta. I started out by asking Sarah why.
It's in the headlines, I think, for a few reasons. One is that it's impacting a much broader group of people. In the last 3 years, we've gone from where most apartments are affordable to that average person to more are unaffordable than are not. And I think the other reason it's in the headlines is that, City of Atlanta is growing faster than any other part of our region. And the pressure that puts on existing residents and their ability to stay in the communities they grew up in. And we're seeing these rapid price increases, both in rents and home prices. And that creates a lot of anxiety.
Are there commonly held misconceptions about this issue, about affordable housing, its lack, its solutions, things that you find yourself kind of telling people over and over again? Well, actually,
I think one of the biggest challenges to addressing our affordability issues is the pervasive perception that housing that is affordable is associated with higher levels of crime, and that just doesn't bear out in the data. People assume that affordable means subsidized. When we say affordable, that means it's Section 8. But there are lots of ways to achieve affordable housing that don't require subsidy.
it turns out there are plenty of tools in the toolbox when it comes to creating affordable housing. Next up, we'll look at a couple of approaches being taken in different parts of the region. You'll want to stick around. Hey there, we love that you're listening. Thank you. We hope that you'll keep spreading the word about What's Next ATL, and we have an incentive to do so. We're doing a giveaway this week of a signed print by local artist John Tyndall. He's done a lot of murals around town, and this print is an 11 by 17 abstract collage of all the things that make Metro Atlanta great. Really cool for framing and hanging up in your office or home, and you can check it out on the page for this episode at whatsnextatl.org. Best of all, you can enter for a chance to win it by emailing us a screenshot of your review and rating of our podcast on your podcast app to info@whatsnextatl.org. That's info@whatsnextatl.org. Good luck. We're back. It's time to learn about one approach to making housing more affordable. For that, we head to Sandy Springs, where Mayor Rusty Paul has his office on the 5th floor of the City Springs complex. It overlooks the hip town square and miles of green in every direction.
We're so proud of our trees, we hold funerals for them when they die.
Well, that's a whole other story that I want to ask you about sometime. Sandy Springs is a fairly affluent suburban city. Its median income is $83,000, which is $20,000 higher than that of the metro area as a whole. But that affluence doesn't reflect every Sandy Springs resident. And now, says Paul, the northern metro city is in danger of losing residents. And so he's made ensuring affordable housing in Sandy Springs one of his primary goals.
A home is the largest single source of family wealth in this country. It's not only shelter, but it is the capital that provides access to the American dream. And what we have done is we have, over the last decade particularly, sawn off the lower rungs of the economic ladder, which homeownership provides to what I call working class families. We have a large number of families in this community who either have to go somewhere else to look for housing, in which case, because the jobs are here, they got to drive back through, which contributes to the congestion and traffic problems that we have. So we either find a way to house them closer to their jobs, or we have to build more roads, and that's a very costly process.
I understand you're particularly considering Sandy Springs North End.
Mm-hmm. We have large stretches of Class B and Class C apartments.
What do you mean by Class B and C?
They're lower end apartments. That's why you have a lot of working class families there. And the real trick for us is how do we get done what we want to do without pushing those families out? But they're being pushed out now. The rents are going up at a rate that they cannot sustain. And that's the trickiest part. I mean, when you look at projects like the Beltline, one of the real challenges is you do something that's really popular and attractive, it brings in other people and it drives costs up. So that's going to be the high wire act that we'll be trying to accomplish, is how can we do what we want to do and bring in more middle class housing and home ownership and not force out large numbers of working class people who are essential to the economy of this community.
What are some of the tools that exist in sort of your affordable housing toolbox? Like, what do that's like the $1 billion question. You've just got a big smile on your face.
Yeah. It is very complicated, but there are things that we can do. For example, we can buy some land for redevelopment or for parks or for infrastructure or for other things that can be catalytic, that can help jumpstart the private sector in doing what they want to do. I mean, that's what we've done. This building that you're sitting in right now was the catalyst for close to $1 billion worth of development within sight of this building.
And when you say this project, you're talking about City Springs.
I'm talking City Springs, the Performing Arts Center, the City Hall, the parks, the residential, the retail, the restaurants. When the development community realized we were serious, then they came in big time to help us finish the process. That's what we're looking to do in the North End right now.
To this end, Mayor Paul has brought together a task force to determine how to build affordable housing in the new North End development. The task force is made up of developers as well as affordable housing and community development experts. I think it might be interesting to some folks that a mayor of Sandy Springs and, a Republican mayor of Sandy Springs is really taken this issue to heart. And I'm wondering if there has been pushback on that.
Oh, you always get pushback. I mean, every community has what we call cave people, citizens against virtually everything. You're always going to get pushback, but the great thing about this community is the large percentage of people understand what we're trying to do, and this has nothing to do with labels. It's about good public policy that benefits the people that we're elected to serve. I'm not sure where we're going to come out, but we're going to try some things and see if we can accomplish what I consider to be the most important challenge facing not just Sandy Springs, but our whole country. How do we get working class families and middle class families back up on an upwardly mobile economic track? And housing has to be the way you do it.
That was Mayor Rusty Paul planning a new development in his city of Sandy Springs that will incorporate affordable housing. Up ahead, we have another perspective.
Specifically to Atlanta, I think that what you're hearing is that this is not only an economic issue, but this is a cultural issue.
That's coming up. And now it's time for this week's poll question. We're talking housing affordability and its challenges for renters and homeowners alike here in Metro Atlanta. So we want to hear from you. Do you pay more than 30% of your income on rent or mortgage? Let us know on the page for this episode at whatsnextatl.org. You can answer yes or no, and if you want to, there's a field to share your story or any comments you might have. We'll share the results next episode.
Hey everyone, I'm Danny Fernandez.
I'm Iffy Wadaway.
And we're the hosts of Nerdificent. And we cover all types of nerdy fandoms, tech. Iffy, what are some of your favorite episodes that we've done?
Oh man, we had the VR episodes, violence in video games, MCU. Didn't we also talk about fan films?
Yeah, we talked about fan films. We've also talked about the history of esports and where it's going, as well as some of the controversies in it.
Dang, so where can people find it if they are interested of these things we just talked about?
They can catch us on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. Remember to look up Nerdificent.
You're tuned to What's Next ATL. This episode, we're talking about what's being done to grapple with Metro Atlanta's affordable housing shortage. In the city of Atlanta, some new developments are now required to include affordable housing. That's due to a plan laid out by our next guest.
I'm Andre Dickens. I'm an Atlanta City Council member for Post 3 at Large, the citywide post. I'm a native of Atlanta. Yes.
Where'd you grow up?
I grew up in Southwest Atlanta, Adamsville. Went to all APS schools, then Georgia Tech for undergrad and Georgia State for graduate school. So I'm a homer, all Atlanta the whole way.
In January 2018, the city of Atlanta began enforcing a new inclusionary zoning policy that affects new rental housing being built in two areas, near the Atlanta Beltline and in the West Side District. The policy requires developers to do one of two things. They can either set aside 10% of units to rent out at affordable rates to people earning 60% or less of the area median income, or they can set aside 15% of those units to rent out at affordable rates to folks earning 80% or less of the area median income. Affordable rates means that rents are set at 30% of the earner's monthly take-home pay. The legislation that led to this policy was spearheaded by Councilmember Dickens, and it came as property values in neighborhoods around the Beltline were soaring and pricing out some longtime residents. Dickens doesn't want to see that continue to happen, and he talked to me about why he's dedicated his career to this issue and what's at stake in the city of Atlanta. The inclusionary zoning focuses on renters, not homeowners. Why is that?
So I am looking at now what we call IZ, Inclusionary Zoning 2.0. We did 1.0 because so much of the product that was going up was rental product. Developers over the past 5 years and 6 years have built nothing but high-rise luxury rentals, and only a few condos and townhomes because the rental market was the dominant market. Now we're seeing that turn a little bit, and I'm seeing a few more condos and a few more townhomes. So we're going to try to capture that as well in this inclusionary zoning policy.
Right, and it's also the case too, right, that something like 90% of the 6,300 current historic West Side households are renters. So we're talking about mostly people who rent.
Yeah, absolutely. Unfortunately, there are a number of people that have been living in homes for 20, 30, 40 years that are still renting. And so home ownership is something that we want to continue to help people get into. But just as we stand right now, so many people are renters that we want to try to put some caps on how much of a rental increase people will get.
You are a lawmaker who has consistently posed this issue of affordable housing as being kind of front and center. Why?
Yeah, I believe it's front and center. Housing is a right to me. Atlanta is a city of neighborhoods. We really, we talk about, I live in this neighborhood or that neighborhood. Everywhere you go is based on, oh, you're in Riverside? Okay, I'm in Reynoldstown.
Your neighborhood and your commute.
Yeah, your neighborhood and your commute. So this brings up the double edge that I was about to get to is housing and transportation make up the bulk of the cost of people, in the city. I think that once you add in the fact that it's expensive, costs are going up on land and construction, and as well as, we don't have a lot of rapid transit throughout the whole city, we have an opportunity challenge. There's some people who, I live so far away from, if I'm in deep Southwest, it takes me an hour on a bus and a train to get to my job center. Well, that can reduce my opportunities in life. Stability of housing provides for better educational outcomes. APS, the schools that are performing lower are the ones that have students that are experiencing transitions in where they live 2 and 3 times a year, and that's largely due to housing instability.
This conversation about housing affordability and that challenge, we're seeing it all over the country, as you said, but what is specifically at stake here in the city of Atlanta?
Yeah, it is a challenge all over the nation. Specifically to Atlanta, though, I think that what you're hearing is that this is not only an economic issue, but this is a cultural issue. So it's economic in that I'm having trouble financing and paying for my rent and my home. But it's also a cultural issue in that, the pace of change in the market is shocking. Even in the neighborhood meetings, et cetera, who has final say? So new folks come in and they have the money to pay $1,800 for a rent. Whereas people that have been here for a while are like, why is this city so expensive now? And so that's a cultural shock. And so that cultural dynamic where fairness has always been the bedrock of Atlanta for 40, 50 years, now we're seeing that being challenged by something that's what would seem as simple as sticks and bricks in housing is now causing a challenge culturally.
That was Atlanta City Council member Andre Dickens. And now we'll wrap up the show with some perspective on what we just heard from Sarah Kirsch of the Urban Land Institute. I asked her whether this challenge of maintaining affordable housing operates differently in the suburban setting of Sandy Springs than in the urban setting of Atlanta.
Both areas have significant stock of existing affordable housing that is rapidly being demolished or upgraded and made less affordable. And that's the low-hanging fruit. You can identify and protect existing affordable housing and then think about how to really support the residents and families that live there. But that's one of the things that I think both Councilman Dickens and Rusty Paul have done a great job of.
Does it say anything to you that we have two lawmakers, one in an arguably more progressive setting and one in an arguably more conservative setting, who have both taken this issue up as their chief issue?
It does. We all experience personally these affordability challenges, whether it's the family in Sandy Springs whose daughter is returning from college and realizes she can't afford to rent an apartment there, or if it's the family in city of Atlanta whose grandparents are going to retire closer to the grandchildren and there's really no affordable senior housing available to them. And I think it represents that this is not a political issue. We see our shared future in identifying solutions.
That was Sarah Kirsch with the Urban Land Institute. Y'all, we are not done with this issue because, as our guests all pointed out, it's kind of a linchpin for so much else. Education, employment, and, as we'll see next time on the show, our own individual futures as we age.
We just got lucky, or I got lucky with her, put it that way, because I'm anal about some things.
Really? I never noticed.
Well, no, you never noticed because you and I are the same kind of person in a lot of ways.
The cutting edge trend among older individuals of saving money by finding roomies. That's right, it's the Golden Girls. And this is an issue that matters to all of us. Forbes magazine named Atlanta the most rapidly aging city in the nation. So the question of how to create livable communities that work for everyone, sooner or later, it's likely to hit all of us hard. That's next time. Thanks to everyone who shared your stories of affordable housing difficulties this episode. All the rest of you ATLians, thanks for tuning in.